Hi, I'm Andy Norris with the Chimera Project. I'm here with Daria Price, the director and producer of Driven to Abstraction, a documentary that covers the scintillating art forgery scandal that shook the art world. I'll let her take it from here.
I'm a filmmaker. I've been working in film for a very long time. I used to be a script supervisor and a screenwriter,
Mm-hmm.
but I'd say about 10 years ago, I turned my focus back to documentaries, which is really where I had started. I previously had done a documentary completely different. It was a kind of science documentary, and it was about advances in prosthetics for amputees. Let me say, the start of this, that it was a lot easier to get people with much bigger problems, missing arms and legs, to agree to interviews and to be on film than it is to get anybody in the art world. I was already very interested in art forgery. I had actually written a screenplay. It wasn't particularly about art forgery, but one of the artists in it was doing some forgery on the side. And I'm a researcher. Whatever I do, I just research. So at a certain point, I started to wonder, could I act? I knew it was going to be a very difficult film to make. And every filmmaker friend of mine said, don't go near it. But if it's a documentary and you really want to make it, you start making it. And then you try to get funding and you try to get grants or you try to get, whatever. But you just start making it. When Glafira Rosales was finally going to be sentenced, and that had been something that I was waiting for and a lot of the journalists, because there was this very long delay between when she's, just to clarify, she is a without doubt guilty person as opposed to some, which, it's still up in the air. And so when she confessed in 2013, was still years before the trial, and yet she wasn't sentenced. And one of the things that was obviously delaying it was that her boyfriend, and probably the real mastermind behind this, was in Spain. He had fled to Spain. She had sort of taken the rap, and they were waiting to see if they could extradite him. The trial was really about Knoedler and Ann Friedman. Eventually what happened was Ann Friedman settled, so she never ended up on the stand, and Knoedler settled. So Michael Hammer never ended up on the stand. And that's what everybody was really waiting to see at the trial. There are stories that are told, they're not exactly lies, but they're misleading. I mean, it was embarrassing to people who really didn't do anything wrong, but who fell for half a story that they didn't know was half a story. There is a line in the film, one of the people says that after drugs and guns, the art trade is the most unregulated in the world. And I think that's true. Other things kept coming out. So it sort of became more and more intriguing. And also on a human level, the amount of conning. It was like, one person was conning one person, then that person maybe was conning somebody else. One thing that was very interesting at the trial was, of course, that it turned out that Knoedler, which everybody thought was doing so well, was actually financially in dire straits. At least that is what the forensic accountant testified to. And that sort of shed a whole new light on why they would have even, however much they knew or didn't know. It was kind of a shocker when it suddenly appeared, and I think it was page 6 in the Post, that there was a new story associated, which I'm sure the feds did know, but nobody else knew. And that's that she had been a very abused woman. That this master, the guy in Spain had, so that sort of shed a whole new light on it, because she had always been the most villainized. But what was really intriguing to most people was the role that Knoedler and Ann Friedman did or didn't play. And, because it was settled, many people who sat at the trial reached their own conclusions about that. I mean, I don't think there's any doubt that hanky-panky was going on. To what extent, who was responsible? I mean, the obvious guilty people are, Bergantinos, the boyfriend, the Spanish boyfriend, and Glafira. Patient Jean also, although there's lots of evidence, to suggest that he certainly, by the end of what he was doing, knew what he was doing. But his defense, when he was still being interviewed, before he fled to China, his defense was always that he thought he was just making, he was making look-alike art that people who couldn't afford the real thing wanted. And in China, it's not so unusual to have that kind of art. Everybody was shape-changing. There are stories that get told a certain way because it's the only way to tell them. I think that in this case, for me, maybe someone else could tell it a different way. For me, it really became the only way to truthfully, to try to make an authentic story out of a story which was just filled with so many lies. I think that that's what was so stunning and embarrassing to the, to large parts of the art world, was that this one painter from China could come over here, study all the masters, and then paint enough like them, let's put it that way, so that a lot of people were fooled.